Okay. Let me just go over here. Hello, everyone. Welcome. You're here with Life Matters Live. Just bear with us for a minute while we tee everything up and we'll get started. Thanks for being here. All right, we might get started because it is 8 o'clock and everything is up and running. So welcome to our Life Matters Live, where we bring the insights from the therapy room into your lounge rooms. Tonight we're joined by Mitch Pinchbeck. Hi, Mitch.
Hey, Chrissy, how you going?
Good, thank you. So Mitch is a registered psychologist here at Life Matters, Psychologists, and his interest is in young people and helping them develop any social anxieties they have or manage any difficult behaviours. And tonight we are going to talk about how to manage a wild child. Thanks for being here, Mitch. And we all know that there's times that the children have these wild behaviours. With your interests and what you practice in your profession, what can you tell us about the early signs of these so-called behaviours?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having us, Chrissy. I guess whenever we start thinking about a wild child, initially we're looking at young persons who have particular difficulty with their emotional regulation. Often you'll notice that they tend to have mood swings that may be in relation to environmental factors and even just to do with their relationships with their peers or even issues at home or with themselves. Essentially, I guess that one of the most common features that we see with children who tend to present like this or adolescents is that we often see defiance. Typically, we'll see a lot of backchat, or that they will tend to be a little bit entitled and wanting to go about their own kind of rules and I guess push the boundaries on what they think is acceptable in their opinion and according to their values. It's pretty frequent that we can see these young persons engaging in particular type of behaviours. Some of those might be antisocial, where there might be a bit of bullying or harassment at home towards their siblings. Mm-hmm. Also, we might even see them beginning to take risk-taking behaviours. That could move anything from drug or alcohol, substance use, even if they're into their later ages of their adolescence. Tend to be taking off and driving or attending house parties or sneaking out. With these behaviours as well, often some parents may not realise that this may not be happening in the family home, but it could also be happening at school, or only happening at school or in sports clubs. So often it can be quite difficult to identify some of these early signs, because it can be very much related just to the environment in which they might, I guess, demonstrate that and try and have those needs met. The first kind of signs outside of that defiance and kind of pairing with it is the difficulty in staying on task or following directions. Sometimes they can develop a bit of a cohort or a following. They might get reactions out of other students, which praises them to continue these behaviours. And essentially that's going to create a bit of a flow-on effect to how they then interact with others and the way that they kind of treat their teachers and their parents. Their level of respect can change, and essentially, it can create a lot of issues that can occur later in life, because they're starting to develop these behaviours and they're reinforced. I guess that some of those problems that we might see in later life can, range from anything for their intelligence development, even as far as, their relationships, how they communicate with people, how they treat them, how they understand them. Particularly if there is that sense of defiance and entitlement, it's a little bit more of a controlling kind of behavior, and again, pushing back in their social circles. because of the way that society's structured, and often there is a bit of resistance for these young teens and children in their pushbacks, we might even see a lot of emotional regulation when they are then pushed back against by their parents who are trying to set boundaries, or their peers who kind of see that, there's a bit of a lack of fairness in the wild child's approach to their relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Often in later adulthood, they're going to potentially have issues setting boundaries for their own families and for their own friends, and even kind of following, I guess, activities of daily living, such as, making it to work on time, or impulse control issues. They might have difficulty with their finances because of those reasons, and it can allude to risk-taking behaviours and antisocial behaviours. So I think it's very important to kind of identify these signs early, because it can quickly manifest based on the environment and how they get appraised by their peers, really.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. That understanding the early signs and what it could lead to. So, what if there is something else going on under the surface, and you can see these behaviours happening at school and at home? What are some things we can do, and who takes lead in guidance?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's a good question, because it's often understanding the triggers and where these behaviours are presenting. If they happen to present in one environment more than another, whether it's at school, considering that these young people are spending at least 45% of their day there versus what they spend at home. Often these might present. So that can again be those issues in relationships, how they treat other students, the way that they're treated. If there's bullying, that can be a trigger for them to then act up. Issues at home can be a factor which can then trigger these things, and the children can have a bit of a flow-on effect at school. It can create a lot of challenges for teachers and parents alike, who, if the child has got a bit of emotional dysregulation at school, the parent may feel that, it's the teacher's job to kind of be reinforcing those boundaries, and vice versa. If there is issues that are at home, a teacher who's trying to manage a classroom of 30 or so students, it can be really difficult, particularly in trying to manage that behavior, essentially trying not to single out the student. But I think one of the important things is that however these triggers are, and having insight into those, it's important for parents and teachers, as well as extracurricular activity coaches and such, to have a form of collaboration and communication. It's essential that we try to avoid kind of labeling the young person as a bad person. Often that they get these labels, and that can often cause more emotional dysregulation. I think it's important to, when teachers and parents communicate, that they're not playing the blame game. It's not one person's responsibility more than another, outside their environments. I think it's very much a team effort. They're both teachers in their own way, and it's a great opportunity for these parties to understand the differences in these environments. I think that's identifying how this young person might engage with their peers versus at home. Are they mistreated by their siblings, or do they mistreat their siblings? Do they push back against their parents, or even push back against their teachers when at school? Often, I think that it's important for teachers to be able to be mindful and monitor their kind of way that they communicate with the young person. Sometimes, when they are having a bit of difficulty managing a classroom, often, the third or fourth time, or the third or fourth student who tends to be doing these kind of behaviours tends to get a bit of a whack from it. And, I think it's important for them to kind of just be mindful that, keeping that level head across the board, and the same thing with parents, try to mirroring the same approaches. I think as well, having consistent boundaries in place. It's really important to understand, that I get that teachers are learning about 30 other students' family environments, and that can be challenging. But I think that those who take the time to connect with the teacher, they can really express, okay, well, you know what, like, this is what our household looks like. And that way they can kind of identify similarities and differences.
Mm-hmm.
I think as well, identifying if there's attention challenges, and again, following tasks. They might be, the student might be really good at doing that in a classroom setting and excel in an academic environment, versus at home, they might have particular challenges with the parenting style of mum and dad, or whoever is kind of raising the household, or whatever that relationship looks like. And I guess effectively, what is the motivators for these children and for these children and young people, and how do they carry their attitudes? It's really important to be non-judgmental. Like, I want to really emphasize that, because again, everyone's coming from different roles. It's important to respect that everyone has got different challenges. In the family home, the parents are balancing potentially a number of children, financial responsibilities, as well as trying to assist their kids be able to thrive in environment, understanding each of their needs as well. Mm-hmm. So, it's not so much like one person, whether it's the teacher or the parent, kind of labeling or discriminating. Looking at involving third parties if it's necessary, mm-hmm. Soccer teams or whoever else, and maybe it's the parent's responsibility to communicate that, because a coach might have a great way of working with a young person who tends to be quite defiant. And I think that we can all learn about the approaches, because everybody's got different learning styles as well. In ways to kind of create better management, I think it's about having structure for the child, and, having that structure and those boundaries aligned with, I guess, the mutual values of the family home, the school environment, the expectations. The one thing about defiance is that you will get young people wanting to go their own way about things, and they may not respect or agree to some of the values and principles and boundaries. They might want to push those, and it's essential to build that rapport, sit down with them in a healthy environment where they can, openly collaborate and explore those boundaries together, and provide education on what's appropriate, without kind of singling a person out, really.
Yeah. Okay, so just working together, collaborating together, and so that kind of sums up what we need to do for the child. Can you talk us through a bit of the process? I just noticed too, we've got some questions that have come through. Thank you, everyone, and we will answer your questions at the end. So if you've just tuned in, this will be recorded, and you can be able to watch it back afterwards as well, to get all this valuable information. So talk us through the process of assessment and diagnosis and things like that for us, Mitch.
Yeah, I think that, often, particularly with the fact that everyone comes from different disciplines of work, they may not be as insightful of if there's underlying issues. So often they might just see that this kid could be a bad child, but there can actually be some underlying factors that are actually causing them to have particular emotional dysregulation. There's things like Peyronie's disease, which is like a developmental disorder as well, which can significantly impact anxiety and social adaptability. There's other developmental disorders. Autism can sometimes be difficult to pick up, and often that is it kind of clusters with other developmental disorders in the way that I kind of see the spectrum. It's a bit like a cluster in a galaxy. You know, there could be obsessive compulsive disorders, there can be defiance, there could be ADHD, and I guess that for some parents, they or teachers, they may not know exactly what those look like. Just because a kid is not running around and looks like they're chasing every soccer ball on the football field does not mean that they might not have a very hyperactive mind and have a hard time staying on task. So, you know, they can often get mislabeled. Autism, again, mislabeling can often occur, and particularly in young girls, because it's a little bit harder to pick up because of their social responsiveness. It tends to be a little bit more mirrored among their peers versus with young boys, it's a little bit easier to identify. But again, you know, I feel that trained professionals have probably got the best opinion and assessment tools to identify that. It goes as far as personality factors. These things can develop out of complex trauma. They can develop out of the household if there's, you know, challenges between mum and dad and the way that mum and dad run a household, and sorry, not just for mum and dad, it's for the genders running the household, sorry. But I guess that, you know, we're trying to set up an environment which is going to be consistent, the way that you want them to see appropriate boundaries. But for those who may not recognize or may not know if there's these personality factors, I think it's about, you know, having that assessed. There's multiple tools that can be done. It can be done through meeting with your school counsellor or even a practicing psychologist. They tend to be some of the more effective ways of being able to recognize it. And I guess that with a lot of practices, like with ours, I know that we've developed a number of suites to kind of make it easy for parents to kind of complete those on their own. So we don't even necessarily have to sit down with the children or young teen to know that there's something going on, and they can get that feedback and say, wow, like, you know what, we've completely missed the ball, or maybe they were onto something and thought, you know, this might be needing some extra addressing.
The suites you're talking about, is that like assessments that the parents would complete on behalf of the child?
Yeah.
To get some type
sorry.
of guidance as to what might be going on?
Yeah, so the parents would go ahead and complete those if they're not meeting with the psychologist and kind of talking about the behaviours, or the psychologist meeting the young person. The assessment suites can be completed at home online. Those are often emailed out to the teachers because it's important to get a number of perspectives. Again, environmental differences are significant for some cases. And, you know, with those, it's, you know, we try to differentiate between, you know, particular type of presentations. So there could be behavioural issues that's related to more about like a defiance or even, you know, if there's underlying anxiety and ability to manage their emotional regulation, maybe there might be a little bit of disturbed mood. There's the autism spectrum disorder assessment, which will enable parents to complete that the same way and identify if there's a developmental factor that actually prevents their child from doing these things. It's not that, you know, that they're going to tell their child to do something different. The child actually does not comprehend some of these things. So it takes extra measures to support them so they can get that information and say, wow, like, okay, where do we go from here now when you have a diagnosis? Yeah, so I guess that, like, we try to and personality one as well, just to be across the board.
All right, well, that sounds great. We've got a couple of questions that have come through. We are talking a lot now about children, adolescents. We had a question about toddlers. how do you help toddlers as a wild child? Was it something that they should? You answer that for us, Mitch.
Yeah. I guess that, like, by starting off, I have to be upfront and also mentioning that I tend to work just outside that toddler age group, but in my practice and my understanding as well, I think the main thing is about working around routine. Routine is an essential part of meeting a toddler's needs. Often they need to understand what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. Mirroring is a big factor for them as well. If they see that, even if adults are being playful or their siblings, trying to set a standard that it's like, okay, well, when is the right time to do this? What happens if you don't do that? I try to, when I talk about discipline, it's not often that word can carry a pretty heavy connotation, but I think it's about having the child then reflect and say, okay, well, was this an appropriate behavior? What do you think happens when you see that? And when these things happen, we want, it's not that we want to be upset, but we also want to help you. When we look at those big emotions that they feel, I think it's about also toning down our response. And what I mean by that is often, I often see it with first-time parents. They see these kind of emotions, they're a bit unfamiliar with them, they can sometimes be a bit reactive. And I think it's about managing your response and maintaining a level of calmness. That means that you might have to, your parenting style significantly impacts how that child is reared all the way through becoming a young person too. So a stricter parent, and that might be your job to be mindful of the way that you approach it.
That makes sense. I think that's a lot of great tips for toddlers. I'll just move on to the next question.
Sure.
Can you explain what a boundary is for, you spoke about putting boundaries in place. So for a toddler, what would that look like?
Yeah, so I kind of differentiate between boundaries and rules. A rule is like, what you can and can't do, which is acknowledged by society in that sense. And then things that are told may be different to that, and based on the values of the family. So a boundary is essentially trying to set a limit based on what the family's value system is. It might even be if they attend a church, or if they go out to a particular place on the weekends that's quite common for them to venture to. If they're going as a family, they want to say, okay, well, we're trying to do these things as a family. So they're setting boundaries that it's like, we're not wanting you to be excluded. We part of this. And it's also for these teens and adolescents to know that, what's acceptable in the household. It might be iPad use. At schools, they might be using them significantly more, but they also have to be aware that, what happens if they're overused, or, appropriate ways to ask for things. I think that that's a helpful boundary. Like throwing tantrums maybe, or meltdowns, could be just a natural behavioral response for toddlers, children and early teens and so on, as well as I guess the meltdowns too. So it's important that we're not trying to put the child in a room and get them to self-soothe, but we're also not exacerbating that, to, be with them, help them regulate. We're also not going to just like give in just because that they do a particular type of big emotion because they want something. When we do that, it can reinforce that is an okay behavior for that child to do those things, which means that they've then learned that, oh, okay, well, next time I want to get a chocolate bar in the supermarket, I'll just like lay on the ground and scream.
Yeah, so it's teaching those, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think there's a lot of great tips that everyone has got there. We will answer some more questions in the chat after we wrap it up here. I'm just mindful of the time we have. So can you give us a quick top tips, Mitch, of what you could, how to manage a wild child?
Yeah, sure. And I hope that I've spoken too quickly, just being mindful of time and trying to be as helpful as possible. Essentially, like, my number one tip is always the go-to of communication and collaboration in a non-judgmental approach. You know, it's about hearing and validating, you know, the wild child, understand why they're doing these behaviors without kind of, you know, negatively reinforcing that it's you know, not on in by shouting at them. You need to build rapport and let them understand that it's a safe place in the family home, and that they can talk about things that they find particularly challenging. Often these you know, teens and adolescents might hide those things and withdraw. They go through changes differently. Second one that I kind of look at outside of this, again, looking at those needs, their values and the boundaries. So values and boundaries, what's consistent in the household, you know, what are we trying to achieve here? Focus on what you want to achieve with them, and then reflect on, okay, how we're going to get to that along the lines of our boundaries. And don't assume, like, you know, we're we've done a fair bit of training, and we can't even read minds. You know, it'd be a pretty awesome superpower and help us out. But, you know, the fact is that run hard questions, and don't be afraid to ask those questions too. And the last one is more for the teachers, the parents, and the caregivers. It's, you guys have got a hell of a job on your hands, you know, working with these teens that can be dysregulated, doing kind of behaviors that, you know, we really worry about. And sometimes we might not be able to change those behaviors. We have to work with them, not against them in that sense. So mindfulness, being aware of your emotional response. Not just, I always tell kind of my clients, like, if you're going to be doing a maths test, you don't just, like, you know, start practicing 5 minutes before the exam. You're not going to really achieve what you need to. You need to practice reflecting on, you know, your thoughts about a situation, how that makes you feel, how you respond, listening to your physical sensations, and maintaining self-care. You know, I don't want to make like it's not all about the children in some sense, but, like, you know what, like, you've also got needs too, and don't feel guilty about the way that, you know, your children may be responding in society. You know, you need to be mindful that they're going through significant changes, and it's also their responsibility to learn emotional regulation strategies. And, you know, that's not all on you. So make sure you do your self-care. Make sure that you engage in your pleasure activities. If you find yourself getting caught up emotionally, work on the things that help for you to regulate. You know, do even counting back from 10 sometimes in a moment of chaos can reset the brain to be able to, you know, get your systems back online, so that you can appropriately problem solve rather than feel like, you know, you're by a tidal wave.
Yeah, that's so good. Thank you so much for all your valuable information. We'll have our top tips sent out to everyone. So you've got it in writing, and you can always contact us at the practice and inquire about the assessments Mitch was explaining about. Each child is different, so we do need to look at it, as Mitch was saying, different. It could be anything for your child. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here. We are coming back to you in next fortnight on Tuesday, 8 p.m. Rachel is going to join us, another psychologist here from Life Matters, and she's going to talk to us about how to being a new mum or a new parent. So yes, everyone, again, this will be available to watch back. If you have any questions, please send them through. Thanks again, Mitch. You've been awesome.
Thanks, Chrissy. Thanks for having us, and for jumping online and some great questions. And yeah, I hope they're helpful.
Will do. Thanks, Mitch.
Thanks. Take care, guys. Bye.